Hey everybody, I'm Vince Gill. We're here at my house in Nashville, Tennessee, knocking around looking at some old guitars and having some fun. And this guitar right here is probably the most important guitar in my life. This was my father's guitar that I learned to play on. It's a little boy. And we had a flood in Nashville not long ago, back in 2010, and this guitar was in the flood, but thank God it was up just high enough that it didn't get in the water. This is what I learned to play on as a little boy. It was probably the first song I learned, Wildwood Flower. Need to work on that one a bit. This is an old Martin, was built in 1942. It's a D28 herringbone, and kind of the most sought after bluegrass guitars. And as a young guitar player, about 18 years old, I left home, and right after I left home, I found this guitar at a bluegrass festival. And this guy was carrying around an old case at the festival and had a sign on it that said $2,500. And I said, man, I don't know. I asked him, can I look at that old herringbone? And he said, sure. And he says, you think you can afford it? And I said, no, probably not, but I'd sure like to play it. And I picked it out and played it. And this thing was in just immaculate condition to be 70 years old. And so I told him I'd like to try to get it if he would consider a trade. I had a newer Martin from the 70s that was just average, and he did. He traded me, and I think $1,500 or $1,600, and that $1,500 or $1,600 was all the money I'd made up to that point in my life that I'd saved for my future, whether I was going to go to college or anything. And I completely emptied my bank account out to buy this guitar as a young kid, and I still have it to this day. And I just, can't believe that I've been lucky enough and smart enough to hang on to some of these first guitars, like my dad's and this one. And I was lucky enough to buy a great guitar when I was a kid, and haven't found one much better than this in all those years. Well, this is I have a love for Martin guitars like probably nobody else in the world, and I've just picked them up from time to time. And some of them, I've turned down a lot of great guitars just because they didn't speak to me and they didn't feel good in my hands or sound good to me or whatever. And every guitar I've ever acquired has been because I love the way it played and love the way it sounded. I don't think I've ever bought anything that didn't sound great to me. And this is a recent purchase of these are the rarest of the rare. This is a 1928 00045. They're called pearl top guitars, and they're probably the most sought after by players and collectors. Collectors probably more than players, but they didn't make very many of these. And this is a 1928 00045 that just sounds like a bell. You hear so much wood in the way these great old Martins were made. Listen to how long that's going to ring. It's still ringing, still sustaining. It's beautiful. This was a gift from Amy. I love that my wife has good taste. This is an OM45 from 1930, and they only made, I think, 41 of these in history. And I happen to have a couple of them, and this was for my 50th birthday, and I saw the case, and I knew it was something good, and just grateful to be married to a kind woman. Do some tuning, couldn't we all? But just, a smattering of what's great about old guitars. This is a really rare piece. This is a 00028. It's made with a herringbone trim like the other one I showed you earlier, but it's got what they call a shade top. There's a very few shade tops that Martin made. I guess back in the day, Martin and Gibson would kind of rival each other, and if Gibson would do something, Martin would try it, and if Martin would do something, Gibson would try it. And there weren't a whole lot of shade tops made, so if you can find a old pre-war Martin that's sunburst finish, you've really got a rare bird. In the collectible world, their value is twice what just a regular natural spruce top guitar would be. This was also a gift from my bride. She knows what I like. Well, when I put this studio in here, it was right after we'd had this flood, and I lost a lot of guitars in the flood, probably 50 guitars, and a bunch of just some great old stuff, a bunch of great amps and all that. And I tried to find a way to bring a lot of these guitars into the studio where I could have them accessible to play, and I always felt like guitars were meant to play, so I came up with this idea to build drawers that kind of almost like a guitar case. And this is an old 61 335, like my first red one that I got. This one's a little bit better than that one, so it gets played a little more. This is an old Strat that I bought off a guy named Bob Britt, who's a great guitar player here in Nashville, and he was kind of going through a little bit of a struggle financially, and I told him, I said, man, I said, I hate to see you lose your guitar. I said, but I'll buy it. I said, if you want it back, I said, it'll be here. So I've had a few cases where I've rescued a few guitars for some old friends, and that's one of them. And I just love, it's what's funny about all these different guitars is maybe somebody would look at that and say, well, why do you have so many of the same kind of guitar? But every one of them plays different, sounds different, and has a completely different voice. And this is a great piece I got from Tom Bukovac, a great guitar player here that does 1 million sessions. And it's a 60 slab board Stratocaster, and it's an amazing sounding guitar on a lot of records. This guitar's been on a lot of records, and it's kind of crazy. I opted for buying guitars instead of bass boats and second homes in the Hamptons and things like that. So I have a pretty extensive and beautiful collection of a lot of really neat old guitars.